Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so very much for joining us here this evening, both live and on YouTube. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are here tonight in partnership with our good friends at Thin Air, the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, and of course, the publisher Arsenal Pulp Press, to celebrate the launch of an incredible short story collection, A Dream of a Woman, stories by Casey Plett. Applaud wildly. Just a few quick housekeeping notes, and then I'll introduce tonight's presenters. Rest assured, you'll only have to put up with me for a few minutes. So when it comes to housekeeping, first of all, there'll be a reading after I vacate the stage. Then we'll be moving on to a conversation hosted by our friend Ben Sigurdson from the Free Press, after which there'll be an opportunity for you all to ask questions, both here in the room and also live on YouTube. So if you are watching on YouTube and questions occur to you, please feel free to write them in the chat. When it comes to the questions here, just because it seems like a poor idea to have everybody sharing a single microphone these days, I will instead just walk up to you and stare at you as you ask your question to me, which I will then repeat into the microphone for the benefit of everyone here and everyone at home. So thank you very much for putting up with that odd little side note. At the close of the event, we'll ask you all to remain seated for one moment as we move Casey to a table immediately beside the cash desk, where she will be signing copies of the book. Books are available for sale at the central cash desk as well, so you can buy one before or after you get into line. But again, once we leave this space, we are officially outside of the performance space, and we've entered the world of retail, where we are governed by very different laws. So at that point, you will remain masked, but we would ask you to please socially distance as soon as you walk past the great area. Thank you very much. So I have been asked to, well, not asked necessarily, but feel like it is probably advantageous at this event to say very nice things about Casey Plett. So I will just say a few things very quickly before I get off the stage. I well remember reading Casey's first short story collection, Safe Girl to Love, which was published by Topside Press, and being astonished by the incredible strengths she showed as a writer, her sense of observation, her ability to capture those small moments in life and pour them onto the page without giving into overt sentimentality, and just astonished by the artistry of her prose. Little Fish, her debut novel from Arsenal Pulp Press, followed a few years after and announced Plett triumphantly as a national voice to watch. The fact that she has somehow managed to exceed the seemingly boundless horizons of her early work is a testament to just how terrifyingly good she is as a writer. Since then, she's won the Lambda Literary Award for Best Transgender Fiction and received an honor of distinction for the Writers' Trust of Canada's Dane Ogilvy Prize for LGBTQ emerging writers. She also co-founded a new publishing house, Little Puss Press, whose first publication was the anthology Meanwhile Elsewhere, Science Fiction and Fantasy from Transgender Writers, that she co-edited with Kat Fitzpatrick. Her latest collection of stories, The Affecting, Beautiful, and Generous, A Dream of a Woman, was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Those of you who have had the chance to read this book already, or any of her work for that matter, will not be surprised to hear that this collection is brilliant. And I'll defer to the writer Trish Salah, who has praised the acuity of her observation and the generosity and intimacy of the emotional life she scripts on the page. And simply follow up by saying that she managed to make me laugh out loud and start sobbing in a single sentence by around page 24, which is typical Plett. We're in the process of celebrating our 40th anniversary here at the store, and the fact that we've remained active and vibrant for so long is a testament not only to the community of writers and readers here in the city and beyond, but also to the people who have worked within these walls. Casey spans all those communities, and welcoming her back like this just reminds us of all we miss. Her sparkling and gloriously caustic wit, her incomparable book recommendations, her incredible presence, and of course, simply being able to boast that such an incredible writer moved among us. We've watched her many accomplishments with pride as the world continues to learn just how amazing she is. And because we do miss her, we decided that there's probably a way around that where we can be reminded of her presence and just get a little bit of side-eye from her on a regular basis. So we are soon installing her giant floating head on our wall. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming the incomparable Casey Plett.
That's amazing. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you, all of you in the McNally, for that means a lot. That means a lot. Obviously, there's a pretty big company up there, so thank you. Okay. John, those were very kind words. Thank you for that. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming. It is, of course, lovely to be back here, and lovely to be here in person. You have my Vax card working as a bookmark. Which I didn't even actually put in the section I was going to read, which is kind of funny, so I have to find it. The first time that I read from my first book, A Safe Girl to Love, I remember I was here doing a reading here, and I read a story that had like really, really explicit sex scene in it. And it was only afterwards that I read that scene that I looked into the audience and suddenly realized that my aunts and uncles and cousins were all here. Many of whom are the same people are still here tonight, so I will not disappoint, and I will also read a story with an explicit sex scene in it because, it's about consistency. It's about it's about building a brand. It's how to succeed in life and as a writer. Well, it's all about it. Okay, I'm going to read a section from a story called Enough Trouble. I'm going to start in the middle, and all you need to know is that there are these two girls, Gemma and Ava. They are both transgender women. They are both in their mid-30s. Gemma's kind of having a bit of a rough time, and she is staying with Ava. This is their first night together. They're also lovers. The other relevant piece of information is that this takes place in an unnamed town of 8,000 people in southern Manitoba that just happens to be 10 minutes down the road from Winkler. I don't really know where it is. Ava has moved there for a job, and Gemma grew up there. Well, I don't know what you're doing next, says Ava, and you don't need to tell me what's up with you, but you can stay here like as long as you need, hey? Thank you, Gemma says. I appreciate that. I do. Oh, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, amazing. Of course, Ava says placidly. Gemma gestures to the music. This reminds me of church singing, she said. This town is heavy with Mennonites, this place where Gemma grew up, and Mennonites make up the family that Gemma comes from. She says, it's not the same, but a little. Ava puts her head on Gemma's shoulder and their legs touch. The polyurethane of Ava's skirt is cool on Gemma's thigh. Ava traces a finger around the top of Gemma's hand, and she says, I loved hearing you sing. Months ago, when they had met that spring, it was at a party on Balmoral. Gemma had been texting a friend and then looked up to see Ava sitting next to her. They began talking, and their hands and legs moved closer, the way they do when the bodies of women pull to each other without asking permission. They kissed quickly and inevitably. It was also immediately obvious. They walked to Gemma's in the cool air and made love on her mattress, Gemma's palm on Ava's throat, Ava's body a ghostly crosshatch below her, serrated by streetlight through the blinds. They woke at 10 the next day to an April prairie snow, trudged over to the Nook in pajamas for breakfast, back to Gemma's to spoon in front of the TV. And late in the evening, Gemma had mentioned offhand that she had grown up in choirs, and Ava asked if she could hear her sing. Gemma got bashful. She said, I can't do that. Ava teased her and said, come on, for me? And Gemma relented and sang That Lonesome Road. She'd sung it in high school choir, but she had really learned to sing, Gemma said, in church. Not just at the church she attended with her dad, but also with her Oma, who'd play an upright piano at her house in Mitchell, over around Steinbach area. She'd play through hymns on Sunday before services, and she had taught Gemma how to sing. You have a beautiful voice, Ava said once Gemma had finished. Thanks, Gemma said. I miss it sometimes, she said quietly. That part of my life's gone now. And Ava said, I understand. Gemma had then pulled up YouTube. She said, this is my favorite version of that song. It's a university choir, Wichita State. It's like it gets done a lot, but it's always too clean. Like it's too like calm, it's too sanitized, it's like too joyous. You know, it gets sung like a lullaby, and it's not a lullaby. Gemma had gotten emotional suddenly, saying that. Next morning, Ava had to book it out early to make it back home for work. That's when Gemma had learned she lived out here, and she couldn't. She hooted. You're fucking kidding me. Are you serious? That's where I grew up. That's my hometown. That is some janky shit. And Ava blushed and put on her clothes. At Gemma's front door, they kissed and kissed. Well, I want some food too. At Gemma's front door, they kissed and kissed. Then Ava's face lit like a flame and she said, let's do this again sometime. And then she left, and Gemma sat on the couch, and the brain pea deluge of dopamine drained away, and regular life stepped back in front of her, a faceless shape in the doorway. You're nice, Gemma says now. Thank you. Gemma puts her arm around the taller girl's body. Ava had ravaging acne as a teenager, and her back and shoulders are moon-gnarled with scars. There's something gorgeous and unfragile to how it makes Ava look, but Gemma, she keeps this thought to herself. You're so warm, she said. I always hate warm. I hate the heat. Oh no, Gemma clucks. Don't tell me you thought it was hot today. Ava says, I haven't been outside. My hands are always cold, though. Ava puts a palm on Gemma's cheek, and she flinches. See? Damn. Bodies. Ava shifts her leg, and the sound of her skirt puts electricity in Gemma's clit. She says, do you have anything else? Nods to the empty bottle. Ava says earnestly, tequila. You're welcome to it. Thanks, Gemma says. I kind of want beer, though. She says this almost to herself. There's a vendor at Traz, and Gemma realizes in that moment, I think I'm comfortable with you. The easy feeling she has right now, it's exactly how Gemma remembered. She doesn't have to trust it to enjoy it. She realizes that in these last 3 months since they met, she has carried the memory of this feeling around with her, like a necklace beneath her skin. I'm so comfortable with you. Ava holds out her fob. I'd have a beer. Mind going alone? Gemma slings up her bag. Gemma crosses South Railway in the misty rain, up and over the tracks. The building is right out of an Old West cartoon, like inside might be men in vests and handled by mustaches. Gemma picks up cane cans from a guy in a Timberwolves hat. When she comes out, the rain has stopped. Most of her money is now gone. She goes west down the alley, away from Ava's building. In the lightless alcove of the post office entrance, she sits and drains one of the cane cans, hidden behind the wheelchair ramp. Gemma leans her head against the brick as restful calm wraps around her. She emerges from the alley by the old library and the traffic light on 8th Street. She's thick with humidity under her dress in the night. The light changes, but no cars go through. Back at Ava's, they pop the beers and talk about a girl out east they both know. Then Gemma says, come here, and there's a flurry of clothes, and Ava's mouth becomes full with Gemma's tits, and Ava wraps her leg around Gemma's back, and Gemma, she can feel Ava's flesh fold into itself, condense, seek every opportunity to not be exposed to air. What Gemma feels is Ava feeling her own body. They fuck against a window, Ava's skirt hastily flipped up, sweat netting the hair on her scarred back, their hands curled together on the rough fabric of the shade. Afterward, they lie on the couch in each other's arms. One of the 3 doors on the other side of the room opens, and a lone woman appears. She's slight and wearing a long slip. Her gray speckled hair is frizzy with breakage, like marks on a cutting board. She looks older than Gemma or Ava. Baby, the woman says, I'm going to sleep. Ava walks over to her, still topless. They whisper in her doorway. Olive, thinks Gemma. Olive is Ava's ex-girlfriend who lives with Ava. Gemma goes to the window facing west and raises a shade halfway. She can see down just enough to make out the traffic light on 8th Street. Used to be the only stoplight out here between Winkler and, oh Lord, who knows how far west. The night sky is still clouds, and all she sees beyond town is a tinkle of farms and a sparse set of cars on the number 3 highway, and the hamlets, clusters of yellow like fireflies in the night. Hands come around Gemma's torso. Her neck warms with Ava's lips. Ava says, what are you looking at? I'll stop there. Thank you. Wait, where do I go now? Oh, amazing. Incredible.
I left my mouse on the podium, which seems unforgivably rude. So your host for this evening is Ben Sigurdson. He's the Free Press literary editor and writes about all things drinks, as well as taking on various other arts and life assignments as needed. He received a Master of Arts degree in English from the University of Manitoba in 2005, then worked his way through a wide range of soul-crushing jobs before landing at the Free Press full-time in 2013. Please give a raucous welcome to Ben Sigurdson.
That was a fantastic reading, and just you capture the dialogue and what have you so well, like probably better than I've seen anyone at a reading before. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
That was, and that presentation of the big picture, that was really nice. I had a small hint of it just as I came in, and I thought, oh my God, that's just like the most amazing way to kick things off. So, you know, back out in the real world doing real live book stuff, how has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been really, really nice. Obviously, I mean, I enjoy performing and I enjoy reading for book events, and with offline events, you cannot sell as many books, and I want money. I want all of your money, lots of it. Please buy many, many copies of this book. But beyond that, it's also just like, it's been like moving to be doing some of these things, and like, you know, people come and like people who haven't seen each other in a while, and like taking myself out of it. Like it really, not to be too corny about it, but it sort of like affirms to me like, oh yeah, like these are kind of important. It's good these things happen. That's been like very moving to witness. So yeah, it's been great.
Well, that's awesome. And so before we get into the book, you know, probably worth knowing, in addition to it being 40 years of McNally Robinson's, 25 years ago today that this store opened.
Right.
Which is
today?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
is that right, John? Oh, Chris says, yeah. Oh, I'm getting 2 nods, and John says today or tomorrow. So, do you have, how long did you work there for?
Like just 2 years.
And do you, any standout memories for you in terms of, you know, like funny stories, anecdotes, anything like that? Sort of.
I remember there was one time I was up at the cash desk. This is a story who I told, by the way, to Ben, the other Ben of the Free Press.
Oh yeah, Waldman.
Right. Yeah. Which he and I told him this knowing that he could not print it, so I just said I'll hear it. And I was at the cash desk, and usually there's at least minimum 2 people there, but I think whoever was managing had to go run off and do something else, and so I was just up there alone. And it was like a pretty slow night, so I was kind of daydreaming. And all of a sudden, I realized unconsciously that I had just been working away, scratching my tits. They were itchy. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, wait, I'm at work. And then I like quickly see, it's like, did anyone see that? That's embarrassing. And then I see that very patiently waiting at the cash desk for me to acknowledge him so he'd come up and make his purchases was the then Premier Greg Selinger. It was like right at his tail end when his numbers were in the toilet, though. So I'm sure he had like other things on his mind. So, but that was like, oh, hi, how's it going? Like, I did not
see that last part coming.
Believe me, neither did I.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the process of pulling this beautiful book together. I loved it so much, and just such an interesting sort of structure to it, and. I believe from doing a little bit of research beforehand, some of it written before the pandemic, some of it during the pandemic. Obviously, there's one story that clearly takes place during the pandemic, but tell me a little bit about sort of pulling it together in general.
Yeah, I mean, there were kind of 2 stages of it. I was lucky enough to score back-to-back residencies right before the pandemic at McDowell in New Hampshire and Playa in Oregon. And so I wrote, like, I think about like half the book in like those 3 months that, you know, I was at those places, and that was amazing. It was like the winter of 2019, 2020.
And that was the Absolution part, right?
Yes, I wrote pretty much all of Absolution then. I wrote Perfect Places during that time. I got the idea for Enough Trouble, like the beginning couple pages also towards the end there. And what else? I think, yeah. And then I wrote Rose City, City of Roses, and then Enough Trouble during the pandemic. And yeah, that was hard. That was really rough. But the first, but also, I don't know, the first half of writing the book was very, very easy street. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, was there a point where you looked at what you had and you thought, this is it? Like, I know that this is, like, there's not another story sort of percolating in the back of your brain or anything like that?
Yeah. It's, I want to say it was like, it was towards the, it was when I first started writing Enough Trouble that I hadn't, and the story that became Rose City, a City of Roses, I had always had it in the back of my head, even before the pandemic. And then I decided to set it during the pandemic when I started writing it. It made sense to me. But I want to say I was about like a little over halfway done when I started to feel like, okay, I think these two are the last two stories I'm going to write. And then I think that's going to be the collection. I think I know how this fits now. And that's usually the case, I think, actually. Usually when I'm at about halfway through the book is when I can start to see like, okay, here's what's left to come. Here's what I have to fill in. But I kind of have an idea of how the shape of this book is going to look right now.
And the shape of this book in particular is really fascinating. I don't know, show of hands, people who have read it? Okay, so some. The right side of the room seems to be the most well-read of this book. But do you want to talk a little bit about the structure of it? Because there is these 5 pieces. I'm going to say it wrong. Absolution.
It's not really, well, I'll tell you that later. But
yeah. But it's split into 5 pieces, sort of alternating chapters, and then there's another piece also that's sort of split into 2 as well. And do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the structure of the book before we get into the emotional nitty-gritty?
Yeah, of course.
That's the thing.
I remember finishing the first chapter of Absolution and thinking, and I intended that to be short. I intended to be about the length of the story. When I'm finishing that first chapter, like I think there's more here. I think I have a lot more with these characters. But it just always sort of made sense to me. I had just read a great book that had a novella right in the middle and like a full 100 pages, and it really worked for that book. But I could already tell right then, I'm going to write more of this, and also it doesn't feel. This just doesn't. I don't think it's going to keep the energy for it. Just doesn't seem right. And I sort of writing different chapters, and I was like, well, I'll deal with it later. And then as I began going back myself to like working on the other stories and going back to writing Absolution, I thought, oh, this actually kind of feels like we could intersperse it. Maybe that feels nice. And I think I like the idea. Like I think of it too as like a TV show or like an ensemble cast movie, where like you hang out with these certain people for a while and you go hang out with other people, but then you're back to like the first people and you kind of like, which sort of feels true to like how disparate, recursive experiences go in real life, So, and luckily my publisher isn't written with that.
That's great. And it's such a, I mean, I think relatively speaking to the other stories, it's, you meet these characters at a very different time of their lives, like much younger and sort of just much less sure of themselves, for lack of a better term, than some of the characters in the other stories.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me about that. That was the other thing I thought of, where I thought like, so in Absolution, we meet the protagonist when she's 21, I think is when we start, and we kind of follow her as she, like over a few years of her life. And the other characters, as you said, are all mostly in their mid-30s. And so part of that also for the interspersing felt compelling to me was sort of like how is this person going to end up? Is she going to turn out like these, like some of the other characters in the book? So it almost sort of felt like A story, B story, A story, B story, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, and looking back on it, that's totally makes sense. One thing I found too in Absolution that I thought you did so well was this sort of transition from names, from pronouns and stuff, and just the way you did it so subtly, and it was just, I thought it was quite skillful and also very beautiful. Like it just seemed to work so effortlessly. Was that a difficult thing to sort of wrap your mind around or to do?
Yeah, not really. I think that I knew this character was going to change her name and pronouns at some point. And I think in the back of my head, I was like, well, I don't like I've seen lots of those stories when it happens and it's this really sort of like flash, it's portrayed as like this kind of flashbang moment. And it's very, you can sort of like, it's like building up to it. And I knew I didn't want to do that. And so then it felt very natural to just kind of have it be these sort of like, when she changes her name and her pronouns, they're separate scenes. And in both parts, they kind of just like happen.
Yeah, it's just sort of,
yeah.
No, I thought it worked just seamlessly. Like it was just brilliant.
Yeah.
So I really thought that was fantastic. Well, I mean, I want to talk about sort of the emotional sort of thrust of the book as well.
Oh, that's good. I have a lot of emotions.
We were joking before that we were both going to be by the end puddles of tears or something like that.
I already am.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah,
You gotta have a good head start on. But the tenderness and the intimacy that comes through in these settings, you know, these towns, cities, apartments, these small spaces, the grappling with the love and the sex between so many of these characters, I feel like, you know, there is this universality to it, and yet you're simultaneously sort of, I have this long question I have to sort of get through, or else I'm going to screw it up. It's what happens when you normally don't go in front of people, especially for like a couple of years or whatever. Right?
All right.
But you're simultaneously sort of grappling with these universal feelings and experiences, and also the experience of trans women, of your Mennonite background, both of which aren't nearly as universal. Like, what is the experience of balancing those more universal feelings with these sort of more specific, points, I guess?
Yeah.
Sense?
It does. And I have lots of answers for this. So
okay,
thanks for
good.
asking that. Yeah.
Because I don't have to read another big long question. Most of my questions are shorter than that.
No, that's the other thing. I appreciate you asking it, and I appreciate you couching it that way. First of all, I think that there are a lot, like, intimacy comes with specificity, and I think that if you try to sort of like write in a very universal, then that kind of ends up being sort of boring. Something that a teacher once called writing by committee, and I can even think about that in terms of thinking about like when I was a book publicist, or when like if you're trying to like make stuff that like and like catch every possible way to talk to somebody, make sure all this information is everyone's going to get it, and you just try to be as universal and non-specific as possible. I mean, like that often ends up for sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of flat writing, you know. And beyond that, I think that there's two things. Number one, I remember I think sometimes, especially in like the world of like writing sort of discussions of how to write, and how literature should work, and questions of audience and who it should be for, quote unquote. I think we kind of sometimes fall into like being a bit reductive with that conversation. Like, I think that it's actually just like very possible to do. I remember having sort of a light bulb moment when I realized that when I first started, I think it was when I worked on my first book, I realized that when I was 13, I had read Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint, which was quite an experience. But that's a whole. If you've read that book, like goodness gracious. But like there's so many things that are specific in that book. It came out in 1969, you know, and it is about a Jewish American man growing up in post-World War II in New Jersey. And like I had zero reference to any of those things when I was 13, but I didn't have to. Like the energy of the book, the liveliness of the book still came across, you know. And sure, there's tons of stuff in that book I didn't understand, but like whatever, we see stuff we don't understand all the time, you know. We interpret by inference, and we kind of like put things together. I think that we're actually like most people are actually like pretty good at that. The second part of that thing is I actually think it's like very possible. Like I think it is. I think it's immensely, not even really that difficult when writing, to structure something so that if person number one understands like a reference or understands exactly what that person's talking about, that they're not bored, whereas person number two who has no idea, they can kind of like infer, they can get an idea. Like for example, let's say you're telling a joke, and in the joke, there's something that makes a reference that the reader doesn't understand. But the reader doesn't necessarily need to think the joke is funny. The reader just needs to understand how it makes a character feel. You know what I mean? And like that's just like very immensely possible. Again, I don't think it's as when I think these when I hear these questions of like audience and universality versus specificity, like again, I just think like on a nuts and bolts craft level, it's actually immensely possible to do both things.
Yeah,
but there's my very long answer to your long question.
That's fantastic. sort of dug right to the core of it for me, because I found myself very moved by the intimacy and the way in which these characters talk to each other. I think that's a total credit to your ability with dialogue, which on top of that is like you showed so beautifully in your reading. I mean, you're just like you've got it totally dialed in, and I think that sort of combined with the overall narration of these stories just brings such an emotional gut punch, for lack of a better term, that I think transcends reader and just is universal without trying to be universal. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy writing dialogue? Like, is it? I feel like it comes so natural. Like, and is it something where you have to that sort of stereotype of like you're standing up in your apartment or something, reading it out loud? Do you do
I've
that?
actually never done that.
No.
I never enjoy writing. Period. Actually, so that's not.
Well, good night, folks.
Yeah. Awful. So don't do it. Writing, not even once. I think what I often will do is that what I'll often do is like write something out and include all the stuff that isn't interesting, I think there's a Grace Paley quote that goes, dialogue is not conversation, dialogue is conversation's greatest hits.
Right.
But to me, how you get that to sound organic and how you get that to sound like literally people talking, like I'll often start when I write dialogue scenes at first, I'll include like the ums, the uhs, like how was your day? It was all right. Have you eaten? No. Like, all right, you want to go? Like, oh, let's include up this, etc. Like I include all the boring stuff that would happen just as two people talk, and then I'll often like snip and cut those out. Hopefully, by the end, what's left is something that sounds compelling.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll often start that way. Yeah, by including all the boring shit.
So if it's like a greatest hits, this is sort of like a B-side sort of thing, or whatever's going on.
Yeah, exactly, on the cutting room floor.
Outtake, yeah, exactly. Your characters often have these, they almost exclusively have these, messy, complicated relationships with each other, and also sort of like a messy, complicated relationship with alcohol, which I find.
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, me neither. Oh God!
Sorry, go on.
I've opened that proverbial can of beer, I guess.
Mm.
But I found it to be far more nuanced than I think a lot of appearances of that kind of stuff in fiction often comes across. Like it's not all like sober equals good and not sober equals bad. Is that like? Can you talk a little bit about the writing that aspect of stories?
Yeah. Thanks for asking it. That was very intentional. And particularly like how you outlined. I even on the back of the book is a picture of a hand with a coffee cup and
my copy just says
right.
blurbs.
Oh no,
it's okay. No, it's fine.
Yeah. I also hate blurbs. Against blurbs.
Yeah.
And that whole idea was kind of part of the idea of like sobriety and using, for lack of a better word, to sort of like be in conversation with each other or have like respect and love for each other, and sort of like not to just sort of like be firm about it. I think so when I first started writing fiction, I definitely knew that with writing about trans stuff that I was very frustrated by the reductiveness of how trans lives were portrayed and how in reality they were like really messy and really complicated and really three-dimensional. And I felt very fine writing those characters, and I felt like what was I gonna say? Like I felt like all the portrayals I had seen were trans characters as either like villains or heroes in these like very two-dimensional ways. And when I was writing Little Fish specifically, I started to feel like I think maybe I feel that same way about addiction, and I think I feel very frustrated by how I see it portrayed, and it feels compelling to me to try to maybe like work with that in fiction. Or like you said, whereas just like sober equals good, not sober equals bad, or like there's two choices in life. There's either like quitting or death, when like every day people get up who live with addictions, and those two things don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it was when I started writing Little Fish that I was like, okay, I think I want to go into this a little deeper. I think that feels compelling. So which I then continue to do with.
Yeah, I mean, it can be messy, but at the same time, it can sort of open conversations to that maybe otherwise wouldn't be opened by people who are like a little bit too I don't know, nervous or whatever.
Yeah. Thanks. And I mean, I think like fiction has some sort of like special outs that let you do that.
Okay, I'm gonna. So I have in an interview that I found that you did about Little Fish, you said about reading books of the movie. You said that, quote, I can feel that tangle and snarl of emotions, and I'm reading rapidly toward the end where I know something will be revealed to me, which is an amazing quote. Where
did I say that?
Oh, geez, I can't remember where I got that from. I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you get that same sort of snarl of emotions while you're writing, like as you're moving towards the end, or is is the bigger picture already sort of in play, or are things revealed to you sort of as you get closer to the end of a story or a novel or whatever?
Yeah, it's usually, I would say, it's definitely the first one. I never it's rarely like planned out beforehand. But I think that kind of like happens in all stages of working on a writing project and it usually comes in the form of being like, oh no, like this happens. Like the reason the reason that I haven't been able to finish this story or this plot point, the reason I haven't been able to figure out those characters' deal, whatever the problem is, like the reason I can't figure the solution out is because this is actually what happens to them. And it's often something that's pretty sad or pretty bleak. And that is an extremely emotional experience, and that is usually the shape in which it takes. I'm like, okay, I guess that's what happens. And I guess I've got to write that out. So,
And do you tend to just power through, or do you take a break, you step back, you stop writing for a couple weeks, or?
I don't know, a couple of weeks, but usually, that last one, usually then I'm like, okay, kind of have to think about how this is actually going to get fleshed out and how this is going to work again. But I usually do it immediately.
Well, I think maybe jump to some questions from the audience pretty soon. Let me think. In another interview, you said you almost think of your first three books, Sacred Love, Little Fish, and Dream of a Woman, as sort of a trilogy of sorts. Do you feel like that's closed, or how do you feel those books intersect with each other? And do you any thoughts at all or whatever on sort of maybe how you've evolved as a writer, how you think about writing, or from A to B to C?
Yeah, thanks. I do feel that way about this one, and I think that A Sacred Love was about most of the characters are in their mid-20s, and it was like, oh no, what's happened to me? And they're sort of they're dealing with intense experiences and the things that have happened. They're just reacting to them. Little Fish is about a woman whose life has been kind of stuck for a long time, and she's a little older, but is sort of very much about stasis. And then I think A Dream of a Woman is a lot more about characters sort of moving forward with parts of their lives, whether that's for better or for worse. So that's one of the main ways in which I feel that those three books are even though a lot of the themes are similar, a lot of what the characters are dealing with are similar, a lot of things about the characters are similar, and even actually there's some characters in A Sacred Love that show up again here in A Dream of a Woman. Some of whom we haven't seen, some of whom are much older than they were in the first book. And I wonder. I do feel in a way that this book sort of closes a very particular fictional project about young trans women who are messy and are trying to be a little less messy to mixed success. But and in some ways it kind of feels that's drawn to a close. Yeah. But also, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe in 20 years I'll look back and I've actually written 6 more books like this. I'm okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try to use that line with each book and try to see, and then
so now you're in a Queen Conks.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Series is or whatever.
Exactly. It'll be Spinal Tap and Drummers Dying.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned, folks.
Oh yeah.
6. Are you working on anything right now, or are you just sort of in book promo mode, sort of lights turned off, sort of in the?
Yeah, I'm not writing anything right now. It feels great. Writing, not even once.
And you're living in New York, right?
I'm in New York. Yeah, I'm teaching. Yeah.
And how's that experience for you?
Oh, it's great. I lived there before. Lived there a decade ago, and yeah, it's really nice being back. It's nice teaching again. I started this publishing project with my friend Kat Fitzpatrick.
Yes, that was my next one.
Oh, amazing.
Nice segue. So yeah, like Little Puss Press.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah, it's got a
in fact,
prop
actually,
right behind you.
I know. So I'm sure John just had that totally planned out. All right. Thank
Total
you.
coincidence.
No out of everything. Yeah, this so this book, Meanwhile Elsewhere, Science Fiction and Fantasy from Transgender Writers. We reprinted it, and the whole idea for the press started because this book went out of print, and we were very frustrated with it. About that. And one night we were expressing our frustration to each other, and our friend Jean Thornton was like, "It's Creative Commons, right?" Which means it's not bound by the same kind of copyright laws. And she was like, "It's Creative Commons, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she was like, why don't you just reprint it yourself? Just do it. And so that's how Little Puss started. Yeah. It's going good. We have books kind of in the pipeline, nothing that we're ready to publicly announce yet, unfortunately. We're being very careful to kind of like, if anybody who's ever worked in indie publishing, which also publishing, not even one, or is adjacent to it, you know that it's a very common thing to be like, oh, here's this book and it's going to come out this month and it's going to be great. And then a few months before that date rolls around, everyone's like, great, can I get a copy of the book? And they're like, no, it's been pushed to 2 years later. Or like, I don't know, or we can't find the author. Or they're like, who knows where they are? Like, or like, no, it's going to come in 2 months. Okay, now 2 months later. Okay, now 2 months later. And we just are very like, keeping our cards close to our chest until we know kind of what
and just throw a pandemic on top of that. I mean, I remember when the pandemic first started, it was just like, all like even the big major publishers were just like, we don't know when this is coming out. Like, you know, we sent you this arc and you know, it's supposed to come out in March or April 2020, and now it's coming out in January 2022, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, okay, we'll just sort of play this by ear or whatever. I was trying to think. So I know you were sort of on a whirlwind trip here this time, but you know, say you were in town, you had 24 hours in Winnipeg. What do you do?
Oh my goodness.
Where do we find Casey Plett?
Oh my goodness.
Is it at the Tim Hortons at Broadway in Maryland writing? Because I know that you said in one interview that you used to
I wrote a lot of little fish at the Tim's on Portage and Sherbrooke. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Maryland?
Oh yeah, Maryland. Sorry, yeah. Portage and Maryland. Goodness gracious. Well, if I tell everyone, then they're going to know where to find me. And I want to. And I always think a joke. I always like. I don't care if the government knows where I am. I just don't want my friends to know where I am. But yeah, I know this is for art, so I'll be truthful with you because.
Well, I know that we went for a beer one time with Handsome Daughter.
Yeah, that was great. We'll probably go there and then get another beer at Cousins.
There you go.
In addition to those places, the Dawn.
Classic.
Yeah.
The Dawn made me think of pierogies.
Yeah.
And so if anyone hasn't seen the 2 videos that are on the Thin Air website, you have to go and watch them. One of them is a great Q&A, which I was hoping you were going to light up a cigarette at some point and just look at me and go, that's a really great question. Because it's just this Q&A, it's amazing Q&A with Casey. And the other one is the passage from it's from Enough Trouble, right? Yeah. Where she's cooking and you cook. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that experience of doing it? Like, what was that like?
Sure.
Was it like a fairly difficult, like, little piece of film to put together?
Yeah. That was, it was kind of a big production. It was like really, really satisfying in the long term, but also like it takes a while to make these things.
Yeah.
So, my housemate in Windsor, just like we spent a day together where she just like filmed me making these pierogies.
Yeah.
And then also sort of like the idea for the other one for the mock interview came afterwards, because that one took so much work. And we were like, why don't we just kind of do this and just kind of like for fun? So
it was great.
Yeah. This interview, by the way, this mock interview is about writing as a trans writer, and it's very serious. I mean, every single word in this interview, you should probably watch it and take it as gospel. There's something else I was going to say. Oh, but actually before, as I was writing Enough Trouble, I actually like made those, followed that recipe myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was also just like, and I know if I wanted it to be accurate, that was a nice excuse. And so it was also a nice excuse.
I just called them pierogies because I didn't want to mispronounce.
Oh, mess up the...
Yeah.
I'm going to call you out for...
Yeah, my lack of Menoness.
Exactly.
I can do.
But I'm just.
Yeah,
that's how I always heard it pronounced.
Okay, there you go. See, I would have screwed that up. I could do Icelandic things.
Oh, amazing.
I could pronounce them. I couldn't make them up.
Oh.
Anyway, that's
wrong order of operation.
That's neither here nor there. It's definitely not why we're here. maybe John is, oh, John's right over there, hiding in the shadows. Do you want to see sort of if there are folks who have questions or I don't know how the online YouTube questions are happening, if you are monitoring those? Or?
I am monitoring them. I have my cell phone in my hand.
He's got all the answers.
Except the anniversary of the store. So if you would like to ask a question on
and
YouTube,
the chewing is, we heard that.
So please do feel free to write your questions into the chat. The one thing I will humbly ask is that when you do put up your hand, that you do please ask a relatively short question rather than make a comment, simply because I have COVID brain just like everyone else does, and it is essentially porridge, so I will not be able to replicate it into the microphone as eloquently as you will inevitably say it. So, are there any questions? Comments, observations? Any questions at all? Oh, yes,
because I already answered all of them, obviously.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of new in advance.
No, and that was a comment about the use of hymns in the reading.
Use of what?
Use of hymns.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in the reading. And how the audience member hadn't necessarily seen or encountered that before as well, and how powerfully the presence of the hymns tied things back to the past and the community.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm always very interested in using music when I write, because I sort of feel like it's almost like a for one, it's almost kind of like a way to cheat and kind of like get a sort of soundtrack of the work. But also, like, I don't know, I think that it's a way to kind of like invoke that sense, hopefully in the reader, that will that sort of allows it like almost like kind of like a multimedia experience. It's a way to get things happening in a reader's head that hopefully supplement what's actually going on. So I'm very intentional and feel very free with the use of how music works in all my writing, but specifically in that story with Enough Trouble, I mean, so much about that is that character's relationship with where she is from and her family and the religion that she grew up with. And so hymns obviously are extremely important to all those things. So yeah, I was very intentional with that.
And I did find in one of the interviews that I found of you with you online, a sort of like a Spotify playlist, I think you put together.
Yeah, that was fun.
And so was that music that you were listening to while you were writing, or are you someone who does that?
I definitely don't listen to music while I'm actually writing. I cannot. I can't. It distracts me too much. But they were like songs that I was listening to a lot during some of the as I was like wrestling with the book. And often what I'll do is like when I'm making stuff and I'll get stuck and I'll go do an errand or go walk somewhere, and it's often then I'll be like, and I'll always be listening to music as I do this. I'll be like, oh, like that's what happens, or like that's how what this character does, or that's how. So it is certainly part of my like untangling process.
Yeah.
Well, we have quite a few questions on YouTube chat.
Oh, good.
Hi, YouTube friends.
Hello. Oh, wait, we don't look at John. We can look at John. Hi, YouTube friend.
I'm a stand-in for the virtual audience. So I'll combine two questions because one is a very fraught question to ask somebody who is friends with other writers. Somebody was wondering about your favorite book of 2021 so far. But then as a follow-up, another person was wondering if you could talk about any inspirations for your writing in general, like any favorite authors or books, etc.
Sure, I'd love. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Let's see. I'm going to answer favorite book of 2021. I've got three things come to mind immediately, so I'll say them all. And they also kind of tie into that second question. So Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, Daryl by Jackie S., and 100 Boyfriends by Brontes Purnell. All three of those books are very different. They're very different styles. They're very different concerns. But they're all amazing. They're all novels. 100 Boyfriends could technically, maybe it's called a short story collection, although it felt sort of like a novel of like disparate pieces to me. I don't know what it's actually classified as. And I in terms of, wait, what was the last part of that question again? John?
It was, can you talk about any inspirations for your writing, like any favorite authors or books, etc.?
Right. One thing so with all these books, I'm really looking forward to rereading them, because that is where I get a lot of inspiration and a lot of sort of like ideas for how to fix stuff and how to write. And actually, Detransition Baby that already happened with, because I read it in draft form and I read it when it came out. But I always feel like rereading some of my favorite stuff is a way to kind of like, when you read first, you're kind of, the first time you're kind of like reading just for pleasure, you're just kind of reading for like enjoyment. And then when you read stuff, you can kind of go like, oh, like that's how they did this thing, or that's how they made this work, or that's how this functions. Like, okay, cool. You can kind of like as a craftsperson, as an artist, as a professional, that I can kind of like see how it's put together a little bit. And I always have to give a shout out when I talk about this stuff to Miriam Taves. I would credit actually a lot in sort of learning how to write fiction in that way, because I reread her book so often, and through that I sort of say like, oh, like this is how, because so much of her writing feels so natural and effortless, and it is, and that's part of why it's so powerful and why it's so good. But actually, I mean, when I met Miriam for the first time, I was like, right where I'm sitting, that's nice. That feels very. But yeah, like rereading things that many times, and you can start to see like, oh, like this is actually how she put this together, or this is how she structured this book, or this is how she makes these sentences flow. Like, yeah, it's a big part of it.
That is a perfect example of why we miss Casey's book recommendations so very much. Another question from YouTube is from somebody named Jessica, who was surprised.
Hi, Jessica.
When you said you don't enjoy the act of writing, because there was so much joy and humor and tenderness in your fiction. I realize you've already said that you don't, but do you have a favorite part of the writing process?
Come on, the part when I'm done, not doing it. Okay, in all seriousness, I actually like. Actually, maybe actually I'm serious about that. What does always feel really good is when, like, during the day, if I'm working on writing, and then once I'm finished for the day, that feels so kind of cathartic and good. And also feel like, all right, like whatever happens to the rest of the day, whatever goes wrong or whatever is, I'm gonna be like, whatever, like I did this. I kind of like did the thing that I wanted to do today in terms of like writing, creativity, et cetera, et cetera. And like that feels very deeply good. That like feels very, very peaceful and very like, okay, all right, like whatever happens the rest of the day, like it doesn't matter. It's all fine. Which I realize that this question is asked toward us like try something positive, perhaps, and I am resolutely resisting. I'm sure it sounds like that. So I sorry, Jessica. But I think I mean that. It actually feels very like extraordinarily calming once I'm like done a session of writing and feel that it went well. It sort of feels like one of the more like calming and accomplishing feelings that I have in my life. So
do you have some days where it's just like you're practically just hanging on for dear life and the words are just coming out like mad, and there's some days where it's just sort of like or is it you're a fairly sort of consistent writer?
Yeah, no, not at all. They definitely vary a lot. And it's funny sometimes, like how some stories, like for example, Rose City, City of Roses, when I wrote that, almost sort of just like came out like a fully formed thing. I think I wrote it in like 2 weeks. And I mean, changed some things around the edges as I was finishing the book up. For the most part, it's how I originally wrote it. Whereas with Enough Trouble, I mean, that is a longer story, but like that took me like over a year to write, and it was mostly what I was working on. And it was so intense and difficult and painful, and it was extraordinarily just like, I felt like I was just like, just like losing it writing that thing. Whereas writing Absolution actually was also very like, just kind of like, I mean, I revised it a lot. It wasn't quite as clean as the first experience that I talked about, but that also just kind of came out like in a couple months. It felt very natural. It felt very like, okay, here we go. So yeah, it varies a lot.
Yeah.
Were there any live questions before I turn back to the virtual space? Yes. Do you have any instructions on how to read A Dream of a Woman to get the most out of it?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, I would say I feel very intentional about that. Usually always it's funny. Sometimes like, oh, there's no way, to right way to read the book. How can everyone? But actually, no, I do have, and I do have opinions and an instruction on this, which is to, I would say, like, read it in order, front to back. Like, I was very intentionally thinking about like how the stories build on each other and how they sort of end up culminating in something that's hopefully kind of like a larger whole. So, so they are definitely meant to be read in the specific order that they're in, front to back. Yeah.
I read it front to back first time, and then the second time I read it, I sort of just played around with it, and I tried reading all the odd solutions back to back. It was really interesting, and you just get such a different perspective on the character. And the other one that's split up as well.
Oh, couldn't hear you talk anymore.
Yeah, that one, the two shorter pieces, so it didn't have as much of an impact, but the shift in perspective and narrative voice was much more obvious that time. But yeah, reading the obsolution pieces together was fascinating. I would totally recommend that as well. After take the person who wrote the book's instructions and read it from the beginning.
You know, it's actually a great idea is if you do that, is to buy a second copy and then use that one to read the other way. Like, I think that's actually my instruction for how to read the book. Yeah.
Or you could have like a second version that you release, like Dream of a Woman remix.
Oh yeah! Oh man, what a great idea!
The first remix book of all time. Well, maybe not. Actually, I think there are a couple already. Sorry.
No. I've always tried to think of all the ways that I can get people to just buy this, like a copy of the same book over and over again. I think maybe you like cracked the code for me. I appreciate that.
I'll take a small, just a small royalty.
Oh yeah.
I work for a newspaper.
Say what?
I work for a newspaper.
Yeah, well, I can see how you would absolutely be envious of the extraordinarily
that's right.
remunerative career of fiction writing. Yeah.
Very stable. Seems very stable.
Mm-hmm.
John, back to you.
Yes. Well, we're just approaching the end of our hour, so I think we can wind down with this question from the virtual space. Seth mentions, in Little Fish, you talk about how time works differently for trans people. Hard agree there, by the way. How does/has trans time affected the characters in A Dream of a Woman?
Gosh, yeah, thank you for that, Seth. I think that I was really interested in A Dream of a Woman in recursiveness and sort of this question of like things that continue to happen and things that repeat, or things that kind of go away for a decade and then come back, or these questions of like, sometimes I think some of these characters, they wake up and they're like, holy crap, like the same thing has been happening for 15 years that I thought was going to be a very temporary part of my life, but instead it's become a permanent part of my life. Like, how did that happen? I definitely didn't plan on that. In fact, there's actually there's an epigraph quote, I believe, that says, temporarily could last a long time. And that's what I was thinking about when I put that quote in. And conversely, there's some experiences I think the characters have where when they're younger, they're kind of like, all right, like this is what my life is going to be now. I know this is just kind of going to be a part of life. And then all of a sudden it goes away. Or all of a sudden it just like doesn't pan out that way. And I think that for maybe, I don't know if I have like specific opinions about trans time with this book, like I did when I couched Little Fish in that intro. But I do think maybe those questions of like, what is my life going to look like? And like, all of a sudden, wait, like the last 15 years have been like this, like how did that happen? I think when you look at those questions with a trans lens, then there's some really kind of like wild stuff that comes to the surface, which I was interested in with this book. So did that answer your question? Is he happy? Tell me about Seth's emotional and state right now, please.
We'll wait.
Oh, Jessica did smile in response to your previous response.
Thanks, Jessica.
As of right now, there has been no response.
TikTok, Seth. We ain't got all night.
I hope Seth is okay. I'm glad Jessica's okay.
Well, we could sit around looking at John looking at his phone all night, I suppose. Yeah. Or we could get you over to the a table to find some books. I think that would be great. Yeah. And I'm sure people would love that quite a bit. So I just want to thank you so much, Casey, for coming and for doing this. It was just a total pleasure to be up here and to do it with you. I always love talking to you, and I love reading your books. And this book is just An absolute dream. No pun intended. I just it really wasn't intended, and I was actually quite sad. Here comes the puddle of tears.
It happened. Well, thank you, Ben. This has been really, really great, and I really appreciate this conversation. I'm really glad we got to do this together.
Always.
And thank you all for coming out here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
There's also an extra copy of that big picture of you. I don't know if you're gonna check it or carry it on or stow it under your seat. I'm not sure.
What a just sort of a kind of like power move that would be to like take like a huge picture of you on like in a train.
Or if they gave it to you and you're like, oh, thank you very much, that's very nice, and then you just leave with it. And they're like, where did the picture of Casey go?
And they're like, Casey, like that's like, oh, that's hilarious. What a jokester. And then like, wait, where is she? Like,
they cut to you and you're sitting in the plane. Anyway, sorry, Charlene, over to you.
Just before Charlene speaks, I know you've all been on tenterhooks. Seth is satisfied and says, yes, that was a very thorough answer. Smiley face.
I'm very, very glad. Okay.
Thanks. Wasn't that a fantastic evening? A huge round of applause, please. We were so excited to be able to include Casey as part of this year's festival, thinairfestival.ca. So if you haven't seen the pierogi demonstration, you can zip onto that website. It's open until Sunday night or Monday morning. Get that exactly right, John. And we'd be happy to have you there. Our festival's almost done. We started September 20th and we are finished on October 18th, and it feels like about 714 days, but I know it's not. It's been so really great to be able to be here in this incredible store. So I would actually like to pause for a second and say not only happy 40th birthday, but also a huge thanks to McNally for making this extraordinary community space for us to gather over and over again, and for being our partner at the festival yet again. So to John and Angela and Chris and the rest of the gang that makes the store so incredible, let's show them our appreciation. Okay. So as well as that website, which is still up, we do have one more evening here tomorrow night. Evan J will be here launching a book of poems called Ripping Down Half the Trees, a very interesting collection, and the host will be Teresa Harasco, who is one of the festival team. Very smart, funny, insightful woman. So I think that's going to be a great conversation. So do come back. And the other thing that's still ahead is a virtual event on November 2nd with the most extraordinary Ian Williams, launching his book called Disorientation, Being Black in Canada.
Ian Williams rules. You should absolutely go to that.
Yeah, he's just not to be missed. He's a really extraordinary person. But
Shelley, did you mention the festival website?
can I mention it again?
The address?
Thinairfestival.ca. And if you can't remember that, you can go to thinairwinnipeg.ca, or you can just type in thin air and it'll take you somewhere. And eventually,
meteorological website.
So before we go, I would just remind you, you need to stay put while Casey gets spirited off to the signing table beside the cash desk. You can certainly get books to sign, but you have to pay for them. Funny how that works here, but and I think we've all had the instruction we're supposed to get two. So buy two books of book, two copies, one for yourself and one for a friend. It's a good idea, right? And also it's going to make Casey rich, which is good. So before we let her release her from this space, let's give one more huge round of applause for Casey and Ben. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Charlene.